On the morning of the second day, a large number of people waited outside to receive instruction in cultivation techniques. They were all relieved to still be alive after the last class, and several of them wondered if the death rate might not be as high as they had thought. Those who had already learned the basic cultivation method began to disseminate it secretly, hoping it would continue to spread even further. But they no longer gathered here just to learn cultivation methods. Instead, they were looking for a partner they could rely on to help them attain their goals. After all, cultivation methods were worthless if they didn't have people they could rely on for assistance. It was now well known among the group that Charles was skilled in adapting cultivation techniques. He even had the ability to control their progress, and only those who followed him could be taught the authentic methods. There are still many people willing to follow me, thought Charles, and although they won't gel as a group around just one cultivation technique, cohesion will come with time. Now it's time for recruitment to storm ahead. We really must take advantage of the current situation, because it will be too difficult to recruit people in the future. He had also spent time explaining matters to his trainees. First, know this. You cannot afford to be distracted by superficial things. Focus on your chosen path. And remember, I'm your boss, not your nanny. Use your initiative. I'm not here to spoon-feed you. Looking at the bustling crowd outside the window, Charles noticed a few people trying not to make eye contact with him. But Olivia realized he wanted to speak to them, so she led the group inside. Because he was so notorious, no one dared step out of line. Standing in front of the table, Charles raised his eyebrows. Have you all finished your little discussion? He looked closer at them. It seems like one of you has changed quite drastically. Although he could only remember Olivia's name, he still had a rough idea of what everyone looked like, and had seen that one of the men in the group had been replaced by a woman. They all looked at Charles, feeling anxious. We threw him out, Olivia said, shrugging. He couldn't keep up, so he was holding us back. We've replaced him with someone more suitable. So what conclusion have you reached? He asked. We have discussed how we might cooperate, Olivia said gravely. First, our forces must exist as an alliance, and we will have 7 seats on the ruling body. When there's an issue that's important for the development of the entire alliance, then everyone will vote. You are the leader and will have 3 votes, but no more than that. Charles nodded. Very reasonable. Realizing he agreed, everyone heaved a sigh of relief. In fact, this alliance would only hold together because Charles acted as a link between them. They only hoped Charles wouldn't try to add more conditions to the agreement. Next is the name of the alliance, Olivia said. We've discussed a few names, but the final decision is in your hands, since you are the leader. If you are not satisfied, then you can create your own name. But names we've come up with are Dawn Alliance, Breaking Dawn. Let's go with Dawn Alliance. Charles couldn't be bothered listening to a long list of names, so he made his decision quickly. He knew these people wanted to show him respect, and that was why they wanted him to decide on the Alliance's name, but he really couldn't care less. After all, he thought, I'm absolutely central to the Alliance's success. If there's any internal conflict, then it'll be down to me to sort it out. He wasn't interested in wasting time on such small matters. As long as they had a name, it didn't matter what it was. There were more important tasks to focus on. Olivia continued. Next are the general rules of the Alliance, which will be decided by the leader. Charles gave it some thought. All the important decisions should be taken by the leader, and the group still needs my influence to recruit people and liaise with the military. So even if they want to reduce my power, they can't go too far. He lifted a finger. I wish to add 3 rules, and breach of any of them will be punishable by death. First, you can withdraw at any time, but you cannot, under any circumstances, harm the overall interest of the Alliance. Second, there will be no collusion with outsiders to the detriment of the Alliance. Third, if there is something difficult to do, then do it yourself, and don't screw it up. I don't intend to restrict anyone more than necessary, but if we behave badly, then it will ruin the image of the entire Alliance. Olivia was stunned. Just 3 rules, she asked. You have no more to add? She had assumed Charles would want to set some rules that would benefit him, but he had exceeded her expectations. The 3 rules he had proposed were all for the sake of the entire Alliance, and not just for himself. I wonder if he's really as selfless as he seems, she thought. But as quickly as the thought crossed her mind, she rejected it. No, he's not that selfless, she thought. He must have a reason for only demanding 3 rules. Is this all about the military and what they want from us? As far as she was concerned, Charles represented the military, and so his attitude was very likely to coincide with theirs. And if the military intended to use them to deal with underground forces, then they could not afford to lay down too many restrictions. And if the Alliance wanted the military's help, then they would have to continue being beneficial to them. It was a good deal, and everyone would win. She was now even more certain of Charles's close relationship with the military. Do you have any instructions for us? She asked. Charles nodded. Yes, you left too quickly yesterday, and you even forgot to take the test. Don't be so careless next time. The entire group felt embarrassed that he had noticed their lack of discipline. After all, the cultivation techniques were the foundation of their development. They had been so focused on working out how to overpower Charles that they had completely forgotten about their test. Help me! Without warning, Elena burst into the room. Her face was pale, and her body was covered in a variety of wounds. Oddly, rather than external wounds, it looked as though they were appearing from within her, cracking her skin. Is this the result of Charles's cultivation technique? Olivia wondered. If it is, then we have a serious problem. She quietly waited for Charles to deal with the situation, thinking, if he can't handle this successfully, then our newly established alliance doesn't have a great future, and he'll only be useful as a military liaison. Charles looked at Elena and said, Didn't I remind you yesterday that it was important you didn't overdo it? I suspected you weren't listening to me. From your current appearance, I assume you must have cultivated until your body reached its limit. Elena nodded, her expression pleading. I was wrong. I should have listened to you. The crowd realized that the cultivation method Elena had used really was dangerous, and the rumors about the risks were not groundless. No one could treat such injuries, so they realized they would be risking their lives using that technique. They all began to talk among themselves. So this cultivation method really can kill people. Then should we continue to cultivate? Maybe only those who cultivate too quickly will die. Who decided how fast we should cultivate? How do we know how fast is too fast? Well, if you're too scared, then you can just leave. I'm not leaving. The group chatted on, with everyone seeming to have an opinion. Although no one dared criticize Charles openly, they still whispered behind his back. He had told them about the death rate, but he had not really emphasized it. They had all been focused on their martial arts skills, and they had long forgotten about this particular risk. Had they not all seen Elena's wounds, they would not have remembered about the high death rate. Sylvia conjured up a special healing light to stop the bleeding. Then she shook her head and said, My healing technique can cure her injuries, but there is still a malign force in her body that is destroying her. I am powerless against it. After the light dispersed, Elena's wounds reopened, and she began to despair. Is this how I'm going to die? No, I'm not ready. Help me! Olivia and the others, even those with superpowers, started to worry even more. If the healing light couldn't help them, then how could they survive? Several of them began to think they should leave while they still could. Again, they all began to talk. This is only the first day of cultivation. Maybe she was just unlucky. It won't be so dangerous in the future. If you're afraid of death, then don't cultivate. And if you're not afraid of death, then go ahead. While everyone was talking, Charles slowly walked over to Elena. A golden light appeared in his hand, and then it slowly merged into Elena's body. As the group watched what was happening, they began to wonder if Charles was also a healer. If he was, then the risk of death wouldn't be as great as they had feared. Olivia and the others began to feel less afraid of Charles. Charles was using the power of the rejuvenation amulet. In his previous life, he had relied on its power to repair his own internal injuries, establishing a reputation as a healer. The wounds on Elena's body gradually closed, and her eyes filled with tears of gratitude. Thank you, she said, tears running down her face. Thank you so much. I will now dedicate my life to you. Everyone was surprised by Elena's swift recovery, and they realized that, as long as Charles could treat cultivation injuries, then the risks would be much lower than they had thought. He can help us increase our strength, Olivia thought. He really is powerful, but we must keep the full extent of his powers a secret. Charles turned to Elena. You didn't listen to my advice, and this is what happened. Now, do you really think that just dedicating your life to me will be enough? You must undertake a special challenge in payment." "Yes, sir," Elena replied, just grateful that she wasn't going to die. Charles took a crystal core from his pocket and said, "Go outside and kill 10 monsters. Then bring me 10 of the crystal cores from their heads. That is what I want in exchange for saving your life after you ignored my warning." "Yes, sir," Elena said firmly. "I will go and hunt them now." She stood up, ready to go out and find the monsters. Charles hurriedly stopped her. "If you go out before you're fully recovered, then you'll die before you can pay me. I'll organize people to go outside the city to hunt monsters, and you should learn from them." Elena nodded and sat down. Charles then looked at Tina and Harper. "You two work with Olivia and discuss any alliance business. I need to go out for a while." By this point, everyone had realized that everything came at a price. Even though Charles could heal people, he clearly wasn't going to do so for free. "Tommy, Hugh, Alice, Hank," Charles called. "The 4 of you come with me. Elena, you would better come too." Then he began to issue more orders. "Olivia, I will leave the matter of the alliance to you. If anyone gets injured due to the cultivation technique, then my medical fees will be calculated according to what I said earlier." Olivia bowed her head, determined to stay on his good side. "Yes, sir." Charles noticed how attractive Olivia was, but he knew he had to remain professional. He didn't want anyone to think he could be so easily swayed, and he knew she was just trying to use him to strengthen her position. Olivia frowned, noticing that he hadn't seemed interested in her. Why doesn't he find me attractive? She wondered. After Charles and the others had left, several people approached Olivia, offering their skills and wanting to join the alliance. After handing over matters relating to the alliance to Olivia, Charles ordered Hank to drive out of the city. "This is a great opportunity to win people over to our cause," Tommy said. "Are we going to let it go just like that?" Charles rolled his eyes at him. "Didn't you hear what I told Tina last night?" Tommy still looked doubtful, and Charles sighed. "It's not up to me to carry out all the recruitment for the alliance. I can delegate that to the existing members, and they'll make sure the alliance grows. Giving them some responsibility will motivate them and stop them from getting involved in petty internal power struggles." Alice chuckled and said, "You're a master tactician, Charles." Charles smiled but said no more. As well as making his people work hard to create a powerful force, he was also targeting the Summers family at the same time. The Summers family had a lot of influence because they had 3 paranormals and a celebrity idol. But that influence would be nothing compared to the force Charles was building. "Where are we going?" Hank asked. Although they were clearly leaving the city, he didn't know their exact destination. "Rivertown," Charles said. "We need to find some medicinal zombies." He had just obtained some blood-drinking swords and wanted to test their power, so he would have to give his enemies a chance to attack him. Inside their fortress, the patriarch of the Summers family smashed another glass of red wine onto the floor in anger. "How could he do this?" Max asked. "How? Why? Our previous plan has come to nothing. Now what are we going to do?" He frowned. "Because of the flaws in the cultivation techniques, we've been very careful when we've publicized them. They should have been at the heart of our plan. But now Charles has ruined everything." Charles had established an alliance in a single day, which was a remarkable achievement. His alliance also had dozens of paranormals, and they all had a common goal, which made them all the more dangerous. His reckless actions had completely destroyed the influence of the Summers family. After all, how many people would choose to seek refuge with them, hoping to learn their cultivation techniques after seeing how successful Charles was? Charles was terrifying. His ability to inspire and organize people, coupled with his ability to judge any situation, made things much more difficult for Max. Max's son Tyler sighed. "Dad, please don't waste the wine," he said. "It's getting increasingly expensive, and it's hard to track it down. Look, we won't change things by complaining about them. The most important thing is to figure out what to do next." Haley thoughtfully tapped her fingers on the table. "Charles is quite an interesting man," she said. "He's killed a lot of people, but he's still building a good relationship with the military. I think he might just about be worthy of me." She'd been raised by her family to become a celebrity and to marry well. If she made good decisions, then she would be able to retain a certain amount of control over her future. and in these difficult circumstances, it might be time for her to use her influence. "If you want him, then go for it," said Tyler, shrugging. "It might be very useful to have Charles as part of our family." Max sneered at her. "Do you seriously think someone like him would change his plans just for you?" "Of course," Haley smiled. "Charles likes fighting and killing people more than anything," Tyler pointed out. "According to the news we've just received, he's taken people out of the city to hunt monsters, even though he's at a critical point in establishing the Dawn Alliance. Clearly, the most important thing to him is showing off his strength and combat skills." Max's younger brother, Howard, shook his head. "But that doesn't mean he's a fool," he said. "Perhaps he has other plans that we're not aware of." Max agreed. "That's right. If we treat him as someone who only knows how to cultivate, then we will be the ones who suffer in the end." "Charles has shown himself to be a healer," Howard said, "but he also made the members of the Dawn Alliance pay for their treatment. It seems everything he does is to build his own reputation. If we can help him do that, then we can get him on our side." "Great idea," Tyler said. "We can marry Haley off to Charles and make him part of our family. Then he'll be completely distracted from his task of managing the Dawn Alliance." Max smiled proudly. "Yes, he doesn't have much interest in managing the organization. As his in-laws, of course, we would have to help him share the burden. But..." He trailed off and looked at Haley. "I wonder if my daughter is satisfied with such a plan." Haley smiled. "I like strong men," she said, shrugging, "so I'm sure he'll satisfy my needs." She was very confident in her beauty and believed that no man could resist her. Tyler clapped his hands together. "Then it sounds like the whole future of this family is in Haley's hands." "Our destination is Rivertown," Charles said. "According to the military's information, there are powerful zombies here. Other than those who were evacuated earlier, almost all the inhabitants are dead." He continued to drive through the streets. "So when we get there, we must be very careful. We might not be able to communicate with each other, and we don't want to lose our way." Alice replied, "Don't worry, we'll keep close to you." Hank was a little worried. "Do we really need to go to such a dangerous place?" "Yes, we do," Charles said. "Courage is the basis of everything. If you are afraid, then you can choose not to go. But if you don't go, then you'll be demoted to just being a driver." "I'll show you that I can be brave," Hank said quickly. He knew his courage was largely inspired by Charles, and if there was a problem with his cultivation, only Charles could help him. Charles nodded. He wasn't going to Rivertown for training. After all, if he wanted to do that, then he could choose any dangerous place. He chose Rivertown because it had an abandoned bomb shelter where a large amount of canned food and water was being stored, and he refused to let it go to waste. In the past, demon hunters had found the stash and had sold some of the food and water in exchange for large amounts of crystal cores. But they had drawn too much attention to themselves, and many people had united to destroy them. Some of the food had been consumed, but the rest had been moved, and Charles knew where it was. He had plenty of room in his energy storage space for the supplies, so he was determined to take them. "Stop the car," he ordered when they arrived at the edge of Rivertown. "After 2 days of practice, you should have grasped some basic techniques. There's a group of zombies ahead, and if you don't successfully deal with them, then you won't be going back with me." Tommy, Hugh, Alice, Hank, and Elena got out of the car. As they did, they saw a group of about 30 zombies who were slowly shambling along the street, their movements stiff and awkward. But then they spotted Charles and the others, and suddenly began to run toward them. Tommy was terrified. "Can we really deal with so many zombies?" he asked. "If you want to prove your worth to me, then you must do exactly that," Charles said, sounding perfectly calm. "Otherwise, you're just a waste of space. I'm not here to be your bodyguard. We're here to fight together and overcome the zombies." Elena, however, had no qualms about tackling the zombies. She held out a steel dagger that Charles had given her and said, "I'll deal with them and win." Taking the lead, she rushed toward the zombie group. "Come on, guys. If Elena can do it, then so can we," Tommy shouted to the others. "She's never been in combat, but she's braver than we are. Let's go." Hugh and Hank exchanged a glance, and then they ran forward together. They knew they couldn't afford to let Charles down, and they didn't want to die. "Are they going to be okay?" Alice asked worriedly. Charles shrugged. An ordinary person can handle zombies with the right weapons. As long as they can overcome their fear and keep clear of any zombie blood, They'll be fine. It's their fear that's the main problem. Then let's just watch and see how they do, Alice said. If they end up drenched in medicinal zombie blood, then I'll help them wash it off. That shouldn't be a problem, right? Charles smiled. I trained my men to be a fighting force, not a suicide squad. Ordinary zombies' blood wouldn't do serious harm, but it would be very troublesome if they didn't clean it away quickly. Tommy and the others finished off the zombies very quickly, and they were relieved they hadn't failed Charles. Even though they were skilled in martial arts, they hadn't had much time to practice cultivation, so they still felt the stress of the fight. Alice went to them and used her superpower to wash off the blood of the medicinal zombies. Then she said, "Congratulations. You've all taken the first step to becoming warriors." Charles came to stand beside Elena, and she handed him the crystal core she had taken from the zombies. "You just killed a total of 11 zombies," Charles told her. "That clears your debt for my healing skills." Elena's eyes flashed with hatred, but Charles didn't care what she thought of him. He'd gotten used to being hated since the apocalypse, and it didn't bother him at all. The important thing was to stay motivated on improving his strength. Charles put away the crystal cores and set off in the direction of the bomb shelter. Hank was sent back to look after the car. He had been injured during the fight, so he wasn't able to do much else. Although the others encountered some monsters on their way to the shelter, they all arrived safely. The ordinary monsters were left to Tommy and the others to kill, while Charles and Alice took care of the more dangerous monsters. "Although we're not all at the same cultivation level, we're still brave," Hugh said. "You can rely on us." As they approached the bomb shelter, Charles ordered them all to be careful. Soon they came to a halt in the yard outside the shelter. Tommy was somewhat puzzled. "Are there any high-grade zombies around?" he asked. Charles shook his head. "Everyone be on your guard. There are cars coming. Don't make it easy for them to see you." Because of the ancient book's cultivation method, his vision and hearing were much more sensitive than that of paranormals, and he could sense danger toward the horizon. Rivertown has been abandoned, he thought. Anything that could cause us any trouble has already been dealt with. So if something appears now, I know it will mean danger. In the 10 years of the apocalypse, those who hadn't been able to adjust to the new reality had all died. "Heavenly Eye Amulet," Charles called, drawing upon his power. It allowed him to observe a fleet of vehicles that the naked eye could not see, and his expression became unusually solemn. Tommy noticed the change in him and asked, "Are you okay? What's the matter? What can you see?" Charles's voice was filled with hatred. "There are 3 modified armored vehicles which will be very difficult to take out. Let's find a place to hide, and then I'll go and meet them." When they had found a hiding place, Alice looked at him nervously. "If it is too dangerous, then you shouldn't go." But Charles replied, "Don't worry. If I really can't deal with them, then I won't force a fight." Then he left without looking back. The Heavenly Eye Amulet allowed him to clearly see every symbol on the armored vehicles. "I know that logo," he thought. "They're from Stellar Technology." He would never forget that in his previous life, the leader of the Demon Hunter Squad had sold himself to Stellar Technology in exchange for restoration fluid. Stellar Technology had then transformed the man into a biochemical war beast. Everyone thought Stellar Technology was an American company, but they had long been controlled by foreign financial groups. They used high-level biotechnology to attack people and commit one heinous crime after another. Charles also had a personal grudge against them, so he had no intention of letting them get away. He wasn't strong enough to fight everyone within the 3 vehicles, but if he could overcome a dozen or so of them, then that would weaken them severely. After leaving Alice and the others, he dodged between the buildings, getting closer and closer to the convoy. At first sight, it looked like a trailer and 2 heavy trucks, but the amulet had already shown him that there were 3 armored vehicles. He realized they were heading in the direction of the bomb shelter, and he began to think rapidly. If their target is really the bomb shelter, then will they try to kill us? He wondered. He knew they would destroy the provisions rather than let them fall into his hands, but did they know exactly where all the supplies were? It was possible they expected the provisions to be in the shelter, but Charles believed they were really hidden in the bunker underneath. If they were even still there. They were still in the early stages of the apocalypse, so the company's people were probably not starving yet. The freak weather had caused a famine, but a company like Stellar Technology would probably have access to all the food it needed. They must have another motive, Charles thought. They won't have come just for the food and water. At that thought, he became even more determined to cause trouble. After all, the enemy's loss was his gain. Two guards with black hair and eyes got out of the car and looked at some men wearing bulletproof armor. "This is where the resources are stored," one guard said respectfully. "Very good," one of the men said, getting out of the car with his heavy machine gun. "We'll go in." "Yes, sir," the guards replied. The remaining visitors emerged from the armored vehicle one by one. Seeing how respectfully the guards treated them made Charles angry. Stellar technology had gone undetected for so long because these traitors had hidden the truth. Perhaps they had cooperated for profit, but it was still treason. Although Charles wasn't an overly patriotic person, he would never betray his country for financial gain. Clearly, these visitors had no morality, and the guards seemed happy enough with the situation. In Charles's eyes, that kind of thinking was unforgivable and had to be corrected. Self-serving thoughts were contagious. Charles counted 19 visitors. The benefit of observing in secret was that he was able to quickly assess the situation, and he was so well hidden that the enemy had no idea he was watching. "I'll start with the guards," he thought. Once the visitors entered the bomb shelter building, his gaze locked onto 6 guards. From his perspective, there was no reason to show them any mercy. At that moment, some zombies walked along the road and noticed the group. Then others began to emerge from the nearby buildings, and they surrounded the 3 armored vehicles. The 6 guards didn't panic. They raised their rifles and pistols and began shooting, wiping out a mixture of regular and mutated zombies of varying strengths. However, one of the guards remained stationary, and he didn't even appear to have a gun. He's a paranormal, Charles thought. That's why he doesn't need a gun. Only a sniper rifle was stronger than the paranormal superpowers, but those were scarce, and Stellar Technology didn't consider guards qualified enough to use one. Finally, when the guards had killed all the zombies, Charles began his attack. "Using my contract, I summoned the creatures from hell," he exclaimed. A pentagonal vessel appeared beneath the feet of the suspected paranormal and rose around him, trapping him inside. He panicked for a moment, and then a rock sword appeared in his hand. He tried to use it on the walls of his prison, but the sword passed through the encasement as though it were made of smoke. The hand holding the sword, however, couldn't breach the walls. "What's going on?" he cried. "Captain! Watch out!" someone shouted. This sudden attack on the enemy's paranormal caused them all to panic. But the commotion was interrupted by a golden beam of light piercing one of their heads. A few daggers flew past, taking out some more of them, and then Charles calmly emerged from the fray. When the paranormal saw Charles, he shouted, "You dare attack us? If a war breaks out because of this, you'll be the one to blame. Let me out or the consequences will be unimaginable." Although his words couldn't breach the Pentagon, Charles could hear the vibrations. He sneered at him and said, "Rolling over and doing what you're told won't prevent a war. Don't talk to me like I'm a child." Charles knew that the social order had already collapsed. Once the details of the plan were exposed, war was inevitable. The paranormal henchman sounded brainwashed. The paranormal gave a miserable scream from inside his prison. Charles had summoned a huge 3-headed dog with long brown fur. Although it wasn't the beast from the Greek underworld, Charles decided to call it Cerberus. It quickly devoured the man. "The Hellhound," Charles said, staring at it. "I can't believe I really summoned it." It was one of the strongest monsters from the lowest level. More importantly, due to its enormous size, Charles could use it as a shield. Just as he was about to lead the hound into the bomb shelter, his eyes fell on the 3 armored vehicles. They would be useful for mobility and long-distance travel. Although Charles already had transport, he couldn't discard such helpful resources. So he decided to open the energy storage space. This was an energetic space larger than a university lecture hall. Although the size of the armored vehicles was considerable, they took up less than a third of the available room. Opening the space used a lot of energy, but Charles considered it worth it to store such valuable vehicles. Once Charles had stored the 3 armored vehicles in the energy storage space, an intense argument broke out in the bomb shelter, followed by continuous gunshots. Then there was an explosion of voices. "Ah! Retreat! No, this is our mission. Stand your ground. We can't leave until we get it. The voices were in a foreign language, but Charles's language skills enabled him to understand the basics of what was being said. From the little he understood, the visitors had gone into the bunker to retrieve something they would risk their lives for. It seemed they had found a huge monster. Although Charles enjoyed kicking his enemies when they were down, so to speak, he didn't want to give them a chance to turn the tables on him. "We're no match for it!" someone in the bunker exclaimed. "Retreat!" "But," someone began. "No buts," the first person insisted. "We need to tell the others and ask for reinforcements." Although Charles didn't know what kind of monster the visitors had encountered, judging by their imminent retreat, they clearly thought they had no chance of winning. "I don't think so," Charles said, frowning. "Earth amulet." The ground shook, and a vast tower of rocks and earth formed at the mouth of the bunker. Then Charles used his innate sword energy to bring the tower crashing down, completely sealing the entrance to the bomb shelter. As if this were not enough, Charles used his earth amulet to increase the weight of the stones tenfold, completely cutting off any hope the visitors might have of escaping. "Let's see which of them makes it out," Charles said to Cerberus. He knew that showing mercy to a known enemy only decreased his own chances of survival, so he would use any means necessary to ensure his own safety. A wave of curses filtered out of the shelter, but once Charles sprinkled some sand around, even those were muffled beyond comprehension. If there were any paranormals among the buried group, then it was possible they could escape. But they still had to deal with the monster first. Charles simply had to wait for the victor to emerge. But he didn't wait idly. Instead, he searched for canned food. The bomb shelter was a useful place to hide from the Air Force bombings. Many people had taken refuge there, so anything of use had been taken long ago. If any mutated zombies managed to breach it, then the results would be disastrous. Charles remembered that food materials hadn't been stored in the bomb shelter itself, but in a bunker beneath it. Unfortunately, because he hadn't participated in the fight, he didn't know its exact location. While he searched for clues, he realized the hellhound was roaring in a particular direction. It wasn't an angry roar, but rather an excited one. Charles looked in the direction it was leading him and spotted a bookstore. "Is there a monster or a survivor inside?" he asked the hound, following it. Confused, he entered the bookstore cautiously. It was divided into 3 floors, 2 above ground and 1 below. In an era where paper-based books had gradually been replaced by electronic ones, the fact that the store existed at all was an oddity. There seemed to be nothing of interest inside, neither monsters nor living people. He also couldn't sense anyone when he used his power of thunder. How does a place like this still exist? He wondered. He was about to leave when he realized no one would maintain a shop that didn't make a profit. Could there be a secret passage under it? He wondered. He stamped on the ground a few times, but it seemed solid. There might be some entrances blocked by these bookshelves, he thought. I'll try to move them. He ordered Cerberus to stand guard. Then he moved the bookshelves one by one, putting various volumes into the energy storage space as he went. He had no intention of reading, but he thought they might be useful as kindling. One of the bookshelves finally revealed a dark passage leading underground. No wonder no one found this place, he thought. When people looked for supplies, food stores and hardware stores were the priority. No one would think to look for food or weapons in a bookstore. Charles took a flashlight from his energy storage space and entered the passage. Soon he found a large amount of canned food for his inventory. Charles opened a box, checked the cans, and put them into the energy storage space. There were several cans in a box, and there were hundreds of boxes. He decided he would do a stock take once he found a safe place. Once almost 90% of the storage space was occupied, he was satisfied. After experiencing the post-apocalyptic era, where resources were scarce, Charles knew that every scrap of food was an asset. Fights over food were a common occurrence, and it was dangerous to look well-fed in case others became suspicious and launched an attack for potential supplies. The canned goods represented wealth and could be used to barter or bribe others. Once he put all the cans away, he looked around with his flashlight. He saw a bed, a chair, and even a dining table. Someone had planned to stay there long term. Someone was prepared, he realized, but where did they go? He didn't dwell on it. The resources were his now. Even if the original owner came back, he had no intention of handing them over. Suddenly, the wall beside him smashed apart as a large man wearing a bulletproof vest fell through it and landed at Charles's feet. Instinctually, Charles summoned his blood-drinking sword, but he quickly realized the opponent was severed from the torso down. This is the stranger I saw outside, he thought. I wonder if this place connects to the bunker. It didn't surprise him that this was the case. Whoever had made the bunker had likely also built the bookstore. Several voices called out, "Here! Come over here quickly! There's a way out!" The appearance of the large hole in the wall was a welcome sign to the visitors, who were battling the unknown monster. To them, the discovery of the passage was like a life preserver to a drowning man. There was a loud noise as a large area of the wall began to collapse. The monster pursuing the visitors broke through. Charles illuminated it with his flashlight, but when he saw it, his pupils shrank and he felt his heart skip a beat. The monster crouched on all fours, ready to pounce. It looked like a giant saber-toothed tiger, except that its body was made entirely of steel. Its colossal paws touched the ground with a terrifying clink of sharpened metal. A mechanical tiger, he thought in awe. He couldn't believe it. The machine had only appeared during the 6th month of the apocalypse. How could it possibly be here? Then again, several countries had conducted secret biochemical experiments, so perhaps someone had engineered it and then studied it in the months before its escape. He wondered if this beast was what the visitors had been looking for. Noticing the beam from Charles's flashlight, several of the visitors spotted him, and they began to shout to each other, "There are people here! Just one civilian! Kill him!" Charles surveyed them, his expression stony. Now wasn't the time to wonder about the tiger. Killing these scumbags was imperative. The mechanical tiger let out a violent roar, and one of the men summoned an earth wall to block its attack. Taking advantage of its distracted state, the 6 remaining survivors used their guns and superpowers to attack Charles. "Extract amulet," Charles cried. A golden light surrounded his body, and he used the amulet to increase his strength, speed, and defense. Since he'd already reached Tier 3, he no longer cared about the side effects. He rushed toward the passageway entrance. In the chaos, 2 bullets hit him, but they only caused minor injuries and didn't affect his movement. Once he was out of the passage, he took out a box of canned food and used it to block the entrance. Then he used his enhanced speed to reach the basement of the 1st floor. While he ran, he ordered the Hellhound telepathically, "Burn this place with hellfire." The infernal dog received the order and opened its mouth. Then faint blue flames set the entire bookstore alight. Charles felt a little unsatisfied with the carnage, so he took out 2 barrels of gasoline and threw them down for good measure. An explosion resounded through the sealed space, making the fire burn even more fiercely. The lines on Charles's arm flashed, and a mass of gray fog appeared. The gray fog was one of the 4 hellish creatures Charles had summoned after sacrificing the people of the Azure Dragon Society. It was called the Consumption. It was actually a swarm of strange bugs capable of absorbing life force. When he had distributed the creatures to protect the target, he hadn't included the Consumption because the bugs' intelligence was too low, and the swarm was too dangerous to control from a distance. It could easily turn on whatever it was supposed to be protecting. Only Charles, who had established a contract, could command it. With a command from Charles, the Hellhound followed him to the entrance of the bomb shelter, but it was blocked by flames. Charles used the Earth Amulet, and a tremendous crack appeared in the ground. Without hesitation, he jumped in. He was concerned that, if the battle continued, he might not be able to defeat them all. And even if he did, the commotion would attract numerous zombies. Landing in the bomb shelter below, he hid behind a wall and shot an ice arrow. The visitors were fighting the mechanical tiger with all their might. There were 4 paranormals among them, and 2 of them were the main force against the tiger. But Charles's ice attack hit one of them in the abdomen, and the ice spread from the wound throughout his entire body. "Bastard!" shouted the remaining paranormal, who was now trapped. Without hesitation, he pushed one of his comrades toward the tiger. With a fierce scream, the unfortunate man lost his right arm and most of his fighting power. The series of screams rang out, and 2 men with guns were surrounded by a cloud of gray mist. Their bodies began to age and decay until they were reduced to piles of bones and dust. 3 to go, Charles thought. With 3 targets down within a minute, Charles used the Hellfire amulet against the 2 remaining paranormals, who were still able to fight. They dodged the Tiger's attacks and shouted at Charles, "We're all humans! We are a family! We have to face the monsters together!" "Ridiculous," Charles replied. He used 2 suppressing amulets to reduce the speed of one of the paranormals by at least half. "We weren't a family when you attacked me before," he reminded them. He couldn't believe these were some of the people who were trusted to ensure humanity's survival. They represented the worst of civilization. The slow-moving man gave a violent scream as the steel tiger tore him in 2, and the remaining 2 visitors used the opportunity to run outside, only to run into Cerberus. The hellhound gave a roar that was followed by 2 screams. Once his enemies had all been defeated, Charles looked at the steel tiger, which was covered in wounds. Its body was covered in bullet holes and burn marks, but it was still standing. If this thing is based on a real tiger, then its weakness should be its heart, Charles thought. He filled the blood-drinking sword with innate sword energy, ready to launch a fatal strike. But he had no intention of killing the beast. The tiger bared its gleaming steel fangs and lunged toward Charles, who summoned his blood-drinking sword. As the tiger pounced, Charles suddenly rolled under it, using the sword to cut off the beast's front paws. Charles could do this, not because he was stronger than the other paranormals, but because the extreme power of the innate sword energy, combined with the incomparably sharp blood-drinking sword, meant it was able to cut through the tiger's steel like butter. Even without its front paws, the tiger still gnashed at Charles with its huge fangs. It was programmed to continue fighting, but its mobility was severely damaged. Charles removed its hind legs and prevented it from moving altogether, and then he searched the animal for its power source, eventually finding a switch on its stomach. He pressed it, and the tiger's eyes dimmed. Then it slowly lowered to the ground, deactivated. This thing must be worth a fortune, Charles thought. It's a pity I can't sell it. The combat strength of the machine wasn't outstanding, but the technology was still extremely valuable. I wonder if Stellar Technology could have developed something like this, he thought. He supposed it was possible, but he was wary of jumping to conclusions. They may have had nothing to do with it. He put it out of his mind. After packing the parts of the mechanical tiger into the remaining energy storage space, he began to search the bomb shelter for other useful things, like research equipment. The bomb shelter hadn't only been built for safety, it also contained an underground lab. Although Charles didn't know why anyone had wanted to build a laboratory there, he knew it contained things that would be of great value to any scientific researcher, so he planned to take as much as he could. Fortunately, with the fire burning beneath the bookstore, the danger was still a safe distance from the laboratory. He filled the entire energy storage space, and then when he had finished, he returned above ground. The battle waves had already spread. In addition to the monsters attracted by the armored vehicle, the surrounding area was surrounded by all kinds of zombies and demonic beasts. "Lightning cadaver serpent, it's time to eat," he said. A huge black snake appeared and flicked its tongue, looking hungrily at the surrounding monsters. It thrived on power, so the stronger the prey, the more delicious it was. It quickly dealt with the Tier 4 zombie and 2 Tier 3s that surrounded Charles, and the rest were no longer a threat. Following that, the Hellhound released a sea of hellfire that spread over the area. Many of the low-level monsters and zombies were immediately incinerated, leaving behind their medicinal crystal cores, which fell to the ground. Charles didn't want to risk leaving the cores behind, so he followed his infernal pets and collected the cores along the way. In a small courtyard on the other side of the complex, Alice and the others were still hiding. Although the zombies usually targeted loud noises, many had noticed them. Tommy killed a zombie with a single slash of his blade. "There are too many," he exclaimed. "We need to get out of here." Hank smiled bitterly and asked, "How? How do we retreat?" "They got in through the door and we can't get past them to reach the car." "Then leave the vehicle and either wait for the monsters to leave or for the boss to come back," Hugh said decisively. "Zombies can't drive, and the car isn't going to drive itself away." His suggestion was valid. None of them would abandon Charles, and a vehicle was nothing compared to their lives. If Charles was powerful enough, then he could get the car back. Elena was busy killing zombies. Alice noticed that the team's morale was low, and she felt a little anxious. If Charles were here, would they still want to retreat? She wondered. We can't hold on much longer, Hank pointed out. Unless Charles comes back, we'll die of exhaustion. We can't fight them all without his help. Everyone was aware of how vital Charles was to their survival. They were much stronger than ordinary people, but they were still limited. In the face of an endless parade of monsters, they simply couldn't win. Where's Charles? Alice wondered, looking around. If we run away, where will we go? She asked the others. No one had an answer to that. This place has already become a paradise for monsters, she continued. There's nowhere else to go. If we leave, we'll just attract more of them. Everyone remained silent. The monsters had been attracted by an explosion and a sea of fire in the distance, not by the survivors themselves. Only those zombies that had happened to pass by had discovered them. If they ran into the streets, there was a risk that more monsters would see them. Seeing that her words had registered with the others, Alice took a deep breath and said gently, Let's not think about leaving on foot. Even if we manage to escape Rivertown, we still can't leave the city. Then what should we do? Hank asked. Tommy and Hugh also looked at Alice for a solution. Alice said, We have two choices. The first is to find Charles. If we can do that, then we'll be safe. They knew she was right, but they didn't know when Charles had become synonymous with safety. He had initially seemed dangerous, but once he had become one of them, he had established himself as a firm pillar of support. What's the other choice? Tommy asked. Alice thought for a moment and then said, Once most of the monsters move toward the explosion, we can just drive away.